Hello, good morning, and welcome to Coffee, Buses, and Politics. Stephen is away this morning, but I'm joined by Alex Bulat.
Hello.
And returned from the US of A, Martin Curtis. How are you both doing this morning?
Yeah, I'm good this morning. I've just about recovered from coming back last Friday.
It does take a long time to recover after such a long flight, I feel. Yes, I'm. Today I did actually a lot of days working in London, and today is another one. So yes, I'm actually quite looking forward to campaigning in the weekend and not traveling for a day.
Do you know, I remember talking to my dad about travel and so on once. When he started work, you got a day off for every time zone that you crossed. So if you were going to the States and so on, you got 10 days off. Anyway, we've got quite a lot to talk about today. So we're talking about a couple of combined authority things, in fact, and the Tiger Pass, the Planning Infrastructure Bill, and NHS England. So the first one with the combined authority, it's up for an award for the most improved, I think it's local government authority. But I saw that was that the chief exec announced that, which was rather nice to see.
I think it's great to see, and from my perspective, I've talked about this a few times, and I talk to people about it a lot. I think people forget that the combined authority was not in a good place 4 years ago when Nick took it over, and it's nice to see, whether it wins or not, and I think it's in with a good shot, to be honest. I think it's in with a very good shot. It's nice to see the fact that the improvements that have been made are recognised, and I think that's good for Nick as well. Actually, it allows him to go out on a high as well.
Yeah, I think it's really good news, and I feel like the political memory in general is really short, and many people don't recall how it was perhaps over 4 years ago and some of the issues that happened there, and how difficult it is to change some of the structures or the problems in any kind of authority if they exist, and how much work it takes from not only from elected politicians but from officers as well to turn something around. So I think it's good to see their efforts, including the officers' efforts, recognized.
It's worth saying that, and it's worth mentioning Rob Bridge as well, to be fair, the chief exec. I've known Rob a long time because he used to be deputy chief exec of Fenland, and he's a top act is Rob, and he deserves credit as well. I think and the name I've forgotten, but his immediate predecessor, I think, who was temporarily filling the role. And any good local authority, you need a good chief exec sat at the top. And the chief exec's role is really important. You're doing two things. One, you're running your organisation and doing everything that's involved in that. But the other one is acting as a sensible sounding board for your leader as well. And I'm pretty sure that Rob has done a great job on both of those as well. And I suspect that Nick would say the same thing.
It's really good. I mean, this is one of the. I think we've implicitly criticised the combined authority under James Palmer here, and how it was operating or not operating. I will say it is difficult because a new organisation was being set up. Right, at the beginning, and that can be difficult to do. I think perhaps it didn't go as well as it should have done. I don't know. Hold on, I don't know the sort of the details on that. But the other thing, of course, is setting it up, and it had a sort of strange mix of powers and a strange, with the combined authority board, and you needed to get people to do things.
And I do think James suffered from the nuances of local politics as well, and that made it very difficult for him as well. And that is also true of Nick's early days, and it's one of the things that people forget is, apart from certain things like bus franchising as an example, the decisions ultimately of the combined authority are made by the combined authority board.
Yeah.
And it's one of the things for the forthcoming election that people need to think about. From my perspective, one of the most important skills that the new mayor is going to need is the ability to work with others and work with others of different political backgrounds, because
I think maybe difficult as well.
Yeah, absolutely. But James really suffered from that during some of his time as as mayor. And actually, funnily enough, the politics had turned around a little bit by the time Nick became mayor. And then he struggled with the same thing, and they've turned around again. For me, the first thing any mayor needs to do when they're elected to office is to get out, talk to the leaders of the councils, and just have conversations privately to say, what can we agree on? What is it we don't agree on? So that you've got an agenda to work with, and you can then start to work behind the scenes on the stuff you can't agree on, so you can actually provide some focus but still have direction. And I think that's the bit that we're not talking about enough. I don't think during the campaign, because it's really important, but it's also positive campaigning.
I mean, this again, I don't know, I've mentioned this before. This is one of the issues with the way that the mayoralty is set up, or the way the mayoralty is perceived, where people think that the mayor has independent power to act, and they don't.
Yeah.
And that's, I think that's a problem with calling it the mayor. I mean, this was something I found when I was mayor of Huntingdon, and I'm not just saying this to remind everybody that I was mayor of Huntingdon.
Were you mayor of Huntingdon?
Yes. If I told you about that I was mayor of Huntingdon, I do feel the need to remind people I was mayor of Huntingdon. But people thought I had power, and it's like in real terms, I had less power that within Huntingdon Town Council than the chair of parish council did over their own council. But I was a figurehead. I had a lovely hat, but people thought, oh, you can, why aren't you doing something about the roads or something? And it's like, well, I've got a hat.
I think it's interesting, to see how much more power, the mayor's office as an elected or appointed position has in other countries, even at the very local level. I was looking at some other models in other European countries, and indeed, I was speaking to some people who come from from some of the Eastern European countries when I was campaigning recently, and saying, and actually having a misunderstanding about the mayor of the town in the UK is. And I was trying to explain some of the differences compared to their own countries, where, for example, some of the mayors have powers over housing budgets and building in the village, and actually approving applications and things like that, which obviously we go into planning later. But in the UK, it's a much more complicated process. You can't just decide as a mayor, let's build those additional houses.
It is. Yeah, I like the sort of accountability that comes from those mayors, and the fact that we seem to be headed towards that is a good thing. And I know in the German system, the mayors are effectively they have a lot of power, and the councils underneath them are basically there to scrutinise and hold them to account, but not make the decisions. And that to me it is a good thing, and because there's no holding back then in terms of accountability. You can't point the finger at local politics or whatever. You've got that guy who's been elected to office, and he's the guy that's accountable for delivery or not, and it's very, very hard to cloud that. And I think that accountability is a good thing. It puts a lot of power in the hands of one person, but if that person is good, that's a good thing, because you get things done. And, you know, as you again, we'll talk about planning later on, you know, the whole planning system, you know, the planning and infrastructure bill is all about, you know, that very thing about how do we make delivery happen.
Yeah. That's, well, there's also the sort of size of mayoralties in other places is rather different. But here, you know, well, you might have a mayoralty for a town, where here a mayoralty is for, okay, you get mayoralties for cities, but the sort of equivalent in Germany would be, you know, for an area like this would be a town, a couple of towns, a group of villages, and so on. You know, and you know, saying about that's more the Mayor of London model, where the mayor can act much more independently, and the Greater London Authority Assembly is there to scrutinise. And I wish that's the structure that we had in Cambridgeshire. But anyway,
I feel like we're heading towards it, and I do feel there's deliberate that's deliberately the way governments, and I say governments because obviously the mayoralties were introduced under the Conservatives, are moving us, and it sort of has to be a step-by-step approach, because it's quite a seismic change in the minds of a lot of people. But I personally think it's a great thing. We just you know, we have to understand, you know, about where we're headed, but also there's nothing wrong. You know, the size thing sort of doesn't matter. You've got a mayor of Birmingham, you know, it's the West Midlands Combined Authority. You know, that's a huge body as well, but that has always functioned pretty well right from day one, to be fair.
Yeah. Should we talking about the Combined Authority? I think we should probably talk about the Lara Holmes situation, which has come out in Cambs News. I mean, there's been a couple of things from Nick. One about, you know, Nick saying, well, the article title is "I inherited a chaotic and dysfunctional combined authority," says Mayor Johnson. This was an overly and scrutiny panel, and as we've just said, that seems to have improved over 10 years. You know, given that they're up for the award for most improved. But the other thing that's come out recently is this thing around Lara Holmes and the allocate and money being loaned for housing. I'm not completely across this story, but it's. See, I don't know. It seems that possibly it wasn't a great idea, but also that the necessary paperwork doesn't seem to be present or available or not done to be, you know, to be available. And the mayor has got in touch with the chief constable and all sorts. And there was an audit that's come out and has been, I think, quite critical of the process. Yeah.
I mean, to me, it's a reflection of the conversation that we've just had, to be honest, about where the combined authority was. And we've got to be careful here, because there's only one source for us really to talk about. And I think that's important. But it's quite concerning, and you know, the fact that it's gone to let's see what comes out of that. Does the chief constable do something? Does he investigate? My instinct is he probably won't, and I can talk about that later on. But somewhere along the line, somewhere in here, it's I know this is an audit report, but in terms of financial audit, there's something fallen over as well. I mean, that's something that I think needs to be asked as well. Is what is the role of the external auditors here? And because they must have, you know, and how hasn't some of this been identified? And there's a balance sometimes as an elected member about the advice you're given and the information you're given, and the knowledge of the questions you need to ask as something's progressing. And the balance is about sometimes it's about knowing what to ask, and if you don't know what to ask, you don't know, the sort of thing. And so there's questions there about, were the right questions asked, was the right challenge put in about the processes and stuff like that. We have to see how it washes, but it is quite disturbing. But it does, I think, highlight the fact that what we were talking about earlier on about what Nick inherited, and I think we have to I think we have to acknowledge that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it does say in some of the reporting I've read that, and I haven't watched that respective committee. Yeah, just reading some of the articles around this topic, that improvements and changes have been made to procedures and process. And then I guess the councillors there were satisfied to note the report, or at least the majority of them, and be assured that some changes are being made, therefore signaling the difference compared to what happened previously. However, I also when I was reading this, I have to say, I was thinking, like, why did it take so long to uncover some of those issues? So it might be that I don't have the full details, but I was thinking, like, why did it take almost 4 years to identify some of the problems with this particular issue?
Yeah, I mean, what I think is, I think this is important, and this isn't having a dig at anybody, but it is important that we have people campaigning at the moment to say they want to bring that 100k homes program back. And we've got to look at this and think, is that wise? I know the criticisms of the 100k homes program. There's something instinctively that feels right about the phrase 100k homes, and if you can do something that puts people on the housing ladder, it's a great thing, because that's a massive issue in our country.
Yep.
But the other side of that, which has been put to me, is actually the 100k homes program costs a lot of money, and you could do a lot more good for a lot more people in different ways. And it's a balance between those two things. But I do think, and I suspect, that we won't see any more campaigning about resurrecting the 100k homes program until this issue is put to bed one way or another. And I suspect that's a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, when I saw that idea revived in the recent campaigning, like, I have to say, like, I was going to look into the detail of, like, how much it did, cost previously, like, and like what are the current costs nowadays. But I do also think that, like, you can do more good to a wider number of people if you invested, I guess, the same amount in other types of schemes. Like, I know why it's appealing from, like, a messaging perspective, but on the other hand, I'm thinking, I mean, one of the main issues from my perspective, as well as, like, recent first time buyer, is actually, like, saving up the deposit, finding the right property, being able to find somewhere, like, closer, like having more stuff built close to the work and study and employment opportunities, rather necessarily if it's like 100k or 150k in the mortgage. Obviously the price does matter in terms of like how much you can borrow, but I think there are other issues as well that will still prevent people from
I'm not sure. The thing is, I think realistically, for people who get one of those homes, that would be great if you can get one.
Yeah, definitely.
Realistically, the planning system is such a mess, and the building market is such a mess. It was just not going to make a big enough difference. I appreciate the desire to do something, but these are systemic, countrywide things where you really need action at a national level.
I mean, I think we should say, and it was me that dodged around it, to be fair, but it's Paul Bristow that's campaigning and said that he's going to return back to the 100k homes. I don't think any of the other candidates have. Yeah. And I will be fair to Paul on this. First of all, Paul is fighting a much more positive campaign now, and I quite like that because I've been very critical early on. But also, Paul was not to know, I don't think, that this issue was going to emerge in the way that it has. Yeah. I can see why the 100k homes is attractive as well. Yeah. But so I think we've got to be fair about it. But my view is you'd be much more it's much more worthwhile to start talking about campaigning for accelerating strategic planning powers for mayors, so that you can actually start to work with the government, the planning and infrastructure bill and everything else, make that work alongside Cambridgeshire, and make sure Cambridgeshire can deliver, what it needs at some pace, and start talking about, those sort of things, because that's what's needed is the planning system to improve. Because if there's a reality that if we deliver more houses, and I have to declare a bit of an interest here because this is the industry I work in, but if you can deliver more housing, you will slowly bring down the cost of housing to people. You've got to manage that very carefully, because you don't want a big negative equity problem. But that's the thing we need to start to do to really deal with this issue, is build houses. And I know it's unpopular, but there's a reality, which is that councillors and mayors are elected to do unpopular things.
Yeah, I mean, I agree on housing. Sorry, the only thing I wanted to add was, as well as the street things, it's also working with. And sorry, this may all look a bit incestuous because you've got the payroll. It's working with landowners and developers and everyone, so that you put together a sensible package for development. So what I'm trying to get is that, okay, you also need all the infrastructure that goes with it. You need the buses, you need the trains, all of that sort of stuff.
You need buses, you need trains, you need road infrastructure, you need schools, you need good green space, you need all that stuff, and that's what a strategic local plan will be able to do far better than a local plan, or a strategic plan that sits over the top of it, so that in the same way that local plans have to comply with neighbourhood plans. Your local plans have to comply with a strategic plan, and it's that idea. So you can plan much better. And Fenland is a great example of what happens when you don't do that, because Fenland's big issue is Fenland's current local plan has a 250 home windfall policy, which means that effectively anything that is under 250 homes, any planning application, there's a presumption in favour. And what it means is this totally chaotic development. You've got this local plan with a 30-year timescale, where you can't plan where your schools are going to go. You can't plan where you need to put new roads in and road improvements in, because you don't know where the development's coming. And so to me, it's the opposite. If you know where the development's coming over the next 30, 40 years, you can start to plan where new schools are going to go, road infrastructure, all that sort of stuff all pulls together. And that to me is the benefit of a more strategic plan, because it hopefully it will work alongside reorganised councils.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Like with a lot of, and it's not only this 100K scheme, but like other schemes proposed in the past that are like good for like kind of election campaigning and attractive as ideas, like don't actually solve the strategic issues within like planning and spending for enough services and so on. Because at the end of the day, okay, let's say you do it and you're like obviously investing a lot of money to do it, you are probably still going to end up with something like small scale and not necessarily, I would say in a lot of cases, and I've read so many of the affordable homes debates, like actually reducing the quality of what you're building as well, which I've seen quite a couple of issues in Cambridge where not very small developments, like 10, 15 houses or so, like had to be redone or like weren't up to standard and so on, because it's kind of like you're rushing through to build something as cheaply as possible without having that long-term strategic planning, which it might be very attractive for people like moving in the first few years, but then in the long term it might not be the best idea as well.
This happened to my parents with a new build.
Yeah,
where they had loads of problems with it, and their house is the end of a terrace, and when the render was put on the terrace, it wasn't done properly, and there was a whole thing and experts and drilling samples and so on. In the end, the developers had to take all of the render off and re-render the entire thing, which meant the whole thing was covered in scaffolding at some huge expense for weeks and weeks while this was done. Anyway, shall we move? Let's talk. Shall we talk about? Well, let's briefly mention the Tiger Pass. What's the Tiger Pass?
There's the £1 fares for under 25s on buses in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. And I've just seen actually, like on the combined authorities social media, around celebrating 1 million journeys with the Tiger Bus Pass. I think it's on the 22nd of March. They have an event. Let me just check where it is, but it says like join us to celebrate 1 million Tiger Bus Pass journeys on the 22nd of March at Hamerton Zoo Park, which is in Cambridgeshire near Saltry. So there's from 10 a.m. till 2 p.m. an event there, including reduced entry for those who hold a Tiger Bus Pass at Hamerton Zoo. So if you are a Tiger Bus Pass holder, or if you're not and you want a trip to the Hamerton Zoo on the 22nd of March, that's an event for you, especially if you like buses. And you can go there, I think, by Tiger on Demand as well.
I would have used my Tiger Pass to get there, but I'm picking my son up from the airport that day, I think.
I think it's because Hamerton Zoo has tigers. Yes, they have tigers. Yeah. So you can take a tiger to see the tiger. See, that's very clever. I see what they did there.
Yeah, it's a well-organized event. Also, I think it's promoting some of the Tiger on Demand services, which, I think they do go to that area.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's, and again, hats off to the combined authority and hats off to Nick for that. I think it's, the Tiger bus passes have been a real success. And, when you think about it, I know the Tiger Pass is for under 25s. That's one journey for every resident in Cambridgeshire, plus some more in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. And that, it's quite an achievement, really. It's a huge success. And I know Nick is fearful of being remembered as the mayor that did buses. But actually what he's done on buses has been great, and he should be proud of it.
Mm. Yeah. And sorry, I was going back. If the combined authority had been in better shape, I wonder if we'd have been able to move faster with franchising, and if the politics had been different. But that's ifs and maybes and all of that sort of thing. One of the other things we were going to talk about was the planning and infrastructure bill, which is coming through, which is I think it's fair to say this is a big bill.
I think it's one of the most controversial bills this government will put through. If it goes through as is proposed, it's potentially huge. It's and some of it I'm a bit wary about because it's quite centralising. And some of it isn't. So I think it's talking about giving local authorities the power to set their own planning fees, which is something I've been talking about for probably 15, 20 years.
And that means that planning departments will be better funded, and those planning authorities that want to be better funded will be better funded, and planning departments, and that's the important thing. You will get a choice between driving down fees. It's similar to council tax, and having your services impacted accordingly, or charging the fees that you want to charge to make sure that you're running a first-class planning service. And most developers would much prefer the second one, to be fair. That happily pay more fees if they were getting the service that they want from it. A lot of planning departments nowadays are so unresponsive, and it's really frustrating, because what you want to do is have a proper dialogue with the planning authority, so that you can make sure that before you submit a planning application, wherever you can, you've got all the creases ironed out. That means planning departments have to be properly resourced. And while they're constrained by government set fees, that's really difficult. Mm. Yeah. And I agree. I mean, the other thing at the moment is we know there's a shortage of planners, but also planning is being you've got the usual business of planning. You've got, I'm just thinking of Huntingdonshire, where you've got the local plan update going on, and you've got local government reorganisation, and you've
absolutely.
got changes. Now, there's a huge amount. I just wondered. Someone from the planning department at Huntingdon said, "Oh, I see you've taken interest in planning." That person knows so much about planning; it's not true, and I don't. I'm beginning to learn a small bit about it. It's complicated and it's difficult. Partly it's difficult because there's a huge amount to deal with, but also the decisions you're making are not easy.
No, go on, carry on.
But one of the things I wanted to ask about, because this is something that the local MP here in Huntingdon, Ben Obsujekti, has raised, is NSIPs, nationally significant infrastructure projects, big things, where he said he thinks the process isn't right, and I think that's one of the things that's being changed. This was in reference, I think, and to one of the solar farms. I mean, on solar, I'm generally quite in favour, so probably disagree. Do you know what the changes that are being proposed to the NSIP?
Do you know, I haven't looked at the NSIP stuff because I don't do a lot of NSIP work.
Right.
But I suspect one of the big issues with NSIP is obviously the lack of local decision making. It's recommendations that come forward from NSIP, and I suspect it's around that. But there's a principle. There are some other things around NSIP that I suspect are going to change, and these perhaps your local MP won't like. It would not surprise me to see, in one way or another, housing being encompassed within the NSIP process. At the moment, they're not, unless they are associated directly with something else. So if you're, as an example, I'll give you an example of, let's say, Sizewell. As part of the Sizewell thing, you decided that you wanted to build some houses for key workers or something like that. That could be part of the NSIP, but a planning application on its own for a major site could not be considered as an NSIP site if it's just for houses. And it wouldn't surprise me to see some of that change, partly because of there is going to be some centralisation of schemes of delegation from what I can see. I'm a little wary about that. I can see why it's being done.
So it's scheme delegation, whereby that's the process by which officers are tasked to make certain decisions.
Yeah, that's it. It's schemes of delegation will set out, what are the decisions that officers are allowed to make without consultation and reference to members, basically. And they vary from council to council. And I'm sort of in favour of that if they work. That last bit is really important. A lot of them don't work. So some of it, there are different ways of ward member call-ins working, as an example. So in some councils, if you've got a development in your ward that you're wary about, you can call it in. Sometimes that is based on the fact that you don't like the recommended decision, the proposed decision. Sometimes you have to call it in within 2 weeks of the application being submitted or validated. Those things change. And in some councils, it's only the ward member. In some councils, and this is how Fenland operates, it's the ward member or a member from a neighbouring ward that can call something in. And the issue is that planning committees should be seeing the most strategic and the most important planning applications. And in a lot of cases, what they're doing is somebody will call in and say, I've got a house being built next door. Can you get it called in so it's seen by committee? And the ward member just sticks his hand up and says, yeah, okay, calls it in. And what you see is planning committees deciding single homes and 2 homes and stuff like that, which should be done by the officers. And that's where it falls down. I've just put together a training package for councillors, which I'm doing with somebody else. And part of what I'm saying there is part of what you need to do as a council is look at your decisions and say, are your planning committee making the right decisions, and are they involved in the right decisions? Are they seeing the most strategic? And the planning committee should see less than 10% of the decisions that are made.
So the issue with that, okay, there are times when you get a single house that does actually need to be looked at, and I'm thinking, and sometimes the thing is there's one, and this is possibly an exercise in self-justification. There are the in Huntingdonshire, if the town or parish council disagrees with the recommendation of the officer, it goes to committee. Now we that gives us potentially quite a lot of if that's used well, and I hope that we have at Huntingdonshire, and very much open to comment or criticism on how we use it. I'm the chair of the planning committee at the town council. And if people want to say, if anyone here from Huntingdonshire wants to say something to me privately, I am listening. Because that potential, there are some small things that we've objected to, but where we think there's actually quite an important issue.
No, there are sometimes. So, a single house can be strategically important because of the context it sets. So, as an example, if you've got a single home that is the first of many, potentially the first of many bits of backland development, as an example, you could argue the case that should go to committee, or that it might need to go to committee. And the reason for that is that what it does is the committee making that decision gives guidance to officers for future similar decisions. There's sort of an example, and it is, but if all you're doing is seeing and bringing in 1 and 2 home applications to committee, and if you're looking at your committee agenda and saying, this is 1 home, this is 2 homes, this is 3. Then you need to be sitting there and saying, actually, we may not be getting this right. But the odd one is not a problem, as long as you can look at it and say, I know why that one's there.
Yeah. I mean, they're yeah.
And it's interesting, there's not a lot of detail at the moment. And one of my concerns about this bill, which I'm broadly supportive of, because I think our planning system is pretty broken, is when we've done this stuff before, we've had housing ministers and ministers for the environment and everything that they've been called in the past, and they've wanted to be really radical. They put these really radical proposals forward, and what's happened is when it's actually got through the committee stage, it's been really, really watered down, and the bill that goes through gets watered down and nothing changes. That's what happened under Michael Gove. It's what happened under, I can't remember the name, Michael Gove's predecessor. And I hope this government are big enough and brave enough to actually see it through, because it is drastically needed. And unless they see it through, they're not going to get anywhere close to their 1.5 million homes target.
Yeah. Unless there's anything else we want to say on that, there's been another big change, or there is another big change coming announced by Wes Streeting, which is the abolition, is that a word? Getting rid of NHS England, which is the quango that oversees the NHS in England, not the NHS. Just so everyone's clear on that. The huge sort of thing to do, and it's basically merging it back into the Department of Health and having more political control of the NHS. Now, say my immediate reaction to this was actually this is probably quite a good thing, because there does seem to be a lot of duplication here. My wife is a doctor in the NHS, and I've got a couple of cousins who are NHS managers. So I've heard complaints about it from different different bits. Although I know it's a long way removed from Whitehall, but also this does feel like a little bit of a sort of rollback of some of the new public management that we got under, well, particularly under Major and Blair and so on, which I thought was interesting for Wes Streeting to be doing. But I'm not going to pretend across the detail any more than I am on anything else. But I'd say this feels quite positive to me.
I think it's positive in that change needs to be made. The NHS as it isn't working. I personally think that eventually we're going to have to move to something far more radical. Is my own sort of view. But some of what radical is will be unpalatable with some people. But, you know, sometime or another, we've got to sit and look across to Europe, not to America. And this is important, but we've got to look across to Europe and ask why, you know, their health outcomes are better in Europe than ours are, and start asking, you know, how, you know, maybe we need to be working towards the sort of system they've got. But I'm always wary of some of this stuff, and the changes that Andrew Lansley made, which he's got some criticism for, very, very unfairly in my view, were made for a reason. Which what he was trying to do was get the political interference out of the NHS. It may not have worked in the same way. Certainly over time it hasn't. But there was a reason for that. And if you go back, you know, where you've got political interference, and this is one of the reasons why public ownership is not necessarily a good thing. If you go back to the origins of the initial sort of decline of the British steel industry, a lot of that was to do with political interference, where the government of the day decided that they were going to invest in steel, and they invested to such an extent in sort of facilities to make steel and all this sort of stuff, that they drove the price down and made other places unviable. And you know, it's that sort of political interference we need to be very wary of. And my fear is we move back to an environment where that sort of stuff happens, and this tends to happen within the public, within British politics, is where we go, okay, let's get the government out of things. And then you go through a phase of going through that, and then you go through a phase of saying, oh, government needs to have more involvement, let's do that. And we're going through, and I think we're going through a stage of that cycle at the moment. But there's also a clear case that we need to make change.
So I agree, there is a risk of what in Yes Minister is called the politician's syllogism. We must do something, this is something, therefore we must do it. You know, and there's a surprising amount of that. I'm not really I take the concern you're making. I think this is a bit different because this isn't a nationalized industry in the manner that steel was. You know, it's not you know, in the same way producing something that, you know, competes on an international market.
That's important to recognise that it isn't. You know, it isn't that, and no. You know, this is a very, very important public service, and that is a difference, and I would accept that.
I mean, I was sort of reading it because you used to have care commissioning groups and strategic health authorities beforehand. And you now have integrated care boards, which, and I think integrated care boards were, and this is just from what I've read, so if I'm wrong, please pull me up on it, were trying to undo some of the issues that were caused by the Health and Social Care Act reforms, to make sure there was sort of coordination going on locally and that sort of thing. I wonder, okay, there's a role for the national coordination, the national stuff, but a lot of the organising has to be done locally.
Agreed.
You know, which GP practice is doing the blood pressure check? Well, maybe they're all going to be doing about that. You know what I mean? How are we getting when I need to get a CPAP machine and I'm at I'm at a surgery in Huntingdon, where do I go for that? Where do I go and see the specialist? This sort of thing. I wonder if if this is something that eventually could and should be devolved down to the combined authorities. We're getting combined authorities everywhere, and so they'd have much more of a role in healthcare, in the NHS, and and you're lining up the boundaries of the NHS, the internal boundaries, if you like, with all the other boundaries.
This is why I'm in favour of regional government, because that's where I think this belongs. I think combined authorities, the combined authorities the size of Cambridgeshire are too small in my view for that sort of stuff. And there is a reality about the Wes Streeting announcement yesterday, which the one thing that does need to be sorted out absolutely urgently within the health system is adult social care, and his proposals don't deal with that at all. What it might lead to is a little bit more political interference and political knowledge, and this is me being totally contradictory to what I said before about the system, and therefore it might drive up the urgency of the need for social care reform. And to be fair, some of the stuff you're talking about does happen to a certain extent locally with social care. So I forgot what it's called. The services for supplying equipment and stuff to people that have got social care needs. That sort of stuff. That's done at a Cambridgeshire level. And integrating some of that stuff more, I think, is needed. This is where reform may help. But we've tried to work at a local level in the past with the health sector. So when I first took on the adult social care portfolio, we had a contract with the NHS, and I inherited a situation where basically what the NHS were doing was taking the county council's money and spending it and not accounting for it properly. And that was all about trying to end bed blocking, to try and integrate the system, to try and prevent bed blocking. And in the end, we managed to get the budget under control to a certain extent, but it really worried me that the incompatibility between the detail to which we were required and were accounting, and the lesser detail to which the NHS were accounting, which meant that we couldn't account for how money was spent properly. And eventually, after I stood down from the council, actually, that agreement was that agreement was ditched. Because it just didn't deliver what it was expected to deliver, and actually the reality is we need to just pull the whole thing together into one system.
It would be interesting to see like the impact of this on integrated care boards, because it does say, like reading up on the announcements, ICBs will need to cut running costs by 50%. So of course there are questions being asked in terms of what will mean for like ICBs, like place-based teams, and would it have any impact on frontline service delivery as opposed to like finding efficiencies in other areas or working more efficiently at the local level. So I think, from like, I guess, a council perspective, where we have ICB representatives coming to like health scrutiny, after the Adults and Health Committee, to be interesting to see like what kind of services will disappear and which will stay in terms of what the ICB is doing in this transition period. And also, like, kind of obviously any kind of change would imply this transition period where like many budgets will be reduced and efficiencies made, and obviously some people will be very unhappy about the process. And we need to also think about the people who are currently working part of those roles, who might not have those roles in like a year or 2 years time, and like what will happen, how can we use the skills within the newer the system as well. So it's really a lot of questions, I think.
I have to say, not in Cambridgeshire, but elsewhere, through the planning system, I've had some quite I've seen some difficult stuff with ICBs, and and how they behave. An example, people talk about within the planning system, where's the new GP surgery coming from? But if you propose a new GP surgery, you still get masses of objection, and the ICB just sit there and go, well, this might be unpopular, we're not going to say anything. Even though it's quite clear that it'll have a positive impact, and they need to be better than that. As I say, that's not Cambridgeshire, just to be clear, but it wouldn't surprise me if it did happen in Cambridgeshire as well, elsewhere. But you do need them to be able to properly plan, and that includes getting involved in the strategic planning process more.
Again, I think this is another argument for tying them into combined authorities. So you're doing that. I mean, so just slightly on a tangent. There's one of the things, the amount of stuff that local government ends up having to cover. How both of you, as you're Alec, you're a county councillor. You were a county councillor, Martin.
I has been, yeah.
How long did it take you when you became county councillors to come up to speed with all the stuff on your portfolio or your committee assignments?
When I became a county councillor, when I became a cabinet member, I made a decision to basically do politics full time. And in hindsight, that may have been a mistake. But I chose to do it because I didn't feel I could do it justice at that time without committing to it full time. And I took I took quite a big cut in income to do that. And it meant I was able to get up to it pretty quickly. I was helped by the fact that my first role was education, basically looking at schools, and I had the amazing Jill Tuck above me as the cabinet member for younger people at the time, which is the next role I took on. So it helped, but also being able to commit the time helped, and I think I was fairly quick. But I was able to dedicate the time to do it. But you never stop learning. And part of what the ability to do it full time meant was I was saying to my officers, get me out on the road, get me out talking to people, get me out visiting schools, get me out visiting youth settings and stuff like that. So I could get out and talk to people on the ground. And that's where you learn, in my view, is getting out and doing that stuff. And you've got to invest in your own time to do it. And that's one of the reasons why, we need councillors. It's not, councillors are not there just to sit in committees and stick their hand up in the way that the whip tells them. They need to be getting out there. And the way you influence under the radar is by making sure you know what you're talking about and you know what people on the ground are saying. And I know that staff really appreciate it as well. I remember going around some looked after children's settings and talking to staff when we were going through some difficult times. And one of the things at that time we were proposing was in order for us to be able to retain staff, because we were cutting, we were proposing that social care staff take a small pay cut. And it was an idea and it was worth considering. I went out down on the ground to go and talk to staff, and I got a proper ear roll about 3 or 4 times, and got a good telling off about it. And I went back to the chief exec and just said, look, this isn't going to work. The staff are really, really against it. And what we need to do is, yes, we need to let the rest of the proposals wash through, but this is causing so much uncertainty. We need to just say, we're not doing this, which is what we did. And it's getting out on the ground and having the time to do it that makes the difference and speeds up your development of knowledge. I don't know if you agree with that, Alex.
Yeah, I mean, I'm the vice chair of communities, and one of the things I probably spend much more time on than reading the committee papers or being in the committee itself is, for example, visiting the projects that we funded through our Capital Priorities Fund. There are over 40 or so across the county. I probably visited like 10 of them so far, speaking to people, seeing actually the impact of funding. And obviously you think I would like to visit all of them, but this is where the work comes in, and the fact I have to take a train in 20 minutes. And for example, like, if this morning there was like an opening of a project, I'll be sorry, I can't do that because I'm working in London. But if it's tomorrow on a Saturday, I can. And if it's my work from home day, I can. But I agree how I learned most is actually being not only doing, because I do all year round campaigning and like door knocking on local issues and so on, but like also actually visiting different parts of the county. And I think it's true to say that like for some councillors of across the political parties spectrum is very much staying in their own area. They represent doing local work there, which is great, but I think there are a lot of people who actually don't really go and visit areas within their like committee role, like beyond their specific local division. And often it's due to time commitments or the fact they have other responsibilities or work. And I know it is difficult, but for example, if you're on the highways committee, for example, and you're commenting about some issues in Cambridge, but you actually haven't been there or driven there, it's actually like quite difficult to kind of contextualize that, in the same way where I find it difficult if I had a decision around, I don't know, a project in Finland and I never visited the area, which I have, like it's very difficult to actually like see myself making an informed decision. And I think that's where the time limitations and the fact that like most people are not full-time councillors, unless you are giving up work like Martin did or you're retired, actually does mean that like some of the most engaged and efficient counselors are people who can, spend full time on it. So yeah, I mean, for me, it's like always a learning process. But the reason why people were like saying like, oh, you speak about, buses and I complain about potholes, why you're not on highways, for example. And the reason I'm not is because it's like so much more like, work, not only in terms of reading and learning, but in terms of like actually going to all the places that in my current capacity with my work alongside this, I can't do this, whereas I can do communities or I could do something else. And I think also the different areas involve more or less work depending on, obviously you can make it full time in any area, but I think on highways, for example, I would really struggle to be in that role, but on some other areas I probably would find easier, also based on my previous experience, because with communities is because I worked in the third sector, so I know actually like a lot of things already. If I was on children's, again, like I'm a school governor, like I have some like background knowledge already, but on some other policy areas I would be like, no, I don't have time unless I do it full time.
The other thing that helps in terms of knowledge is one of the things is it's really, really easy as a councillor to look at your council area, in terms of county council being, they're looking at the county boundary and within the county boundary. And one of the things that's important to do especially when you're in a position, a leadership position of some sort, is to take a step up from that. And so organisations like Local Government Association, East of England Local Government Association, places like that are good places to learn, because you can see and feel what other people are doing. And things like being a peer reviewer, which I was, really helps. So there's a scheme that's still going on in Cambridgeshire, I think, which is a Community Navigators scheme. Well, the Community Navigators scheme came about because I did a peer review of Dorset, and looking at their adult social care. Was it Dorset? I think it was Swindon. Anyway, one of those. Anyway, and I did a peer review somewhere else, and I saw their Community Navigators scheme, and that they were a little bit better resourced than Cambridgeshire, because everybody is. So their scheme had a lot more bells and whistles on it. But when I saw it, I looked at it and thought, I can see how that is benefiting older people. And I can absolutely see it. And I came back and I had a bit of a nag over a period of a few months with the strategic director at the time, and just said, look, I know this is money and everything else, but in terms of prevention, which was always my mantra with children's services and with social care, this is really important. And that scheme was introduced. So, that ability to step up and look at what's going elsewhere is really, really important. There's a lot of councils, and this is one of my criticisms of Fenland a little bit. It's they seem to be very insular. If a Fenland council wants to point out to me that they're not, great, please do it, please tell me. But they seem to be very insular. And so they don't have that sort of bigger picture view of the world that you understand how you fit into that bigger picture, but you also see what's going on elsewhere and see best practice. Really, really important.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think going on a lot of the LGA leadership academy, like specific courses, training, like, different like counselor groups really, really helped me like in the learning. But once again, that's something you have to have the capacity for. And I went on many of those like weekend sessions.
I did about 4 different leadership academies over a period of time. They were really, really good. They were very, very sociable, which was pretty good. I also did the Next Generation Leadership Scheme as well. And at that time, I think it's been watered down now. It was a really, really good scheme. In fact, we went across to look at local government in a place called Lübeck in Germany, to look at local government structures in Germany, which was fantastic, really informed me. Those sort of things are really important, because if you do want people to lead and make change, the more knowledge you have, is better. But yeah, the Leadership Academy stuff was really, really good. I had a good time on those.
Yeah, same here.
I learned a lot as well.
Yes, a very sociable time. Well, on that note, I need to get my train at 9. So good to see you both.
Talking of trains, hopefully this is going to work. I went and rode on the Flying Scotsman, so I've got a video of the Flying Scotsman, which hopefully is going to play as an outro reel. So I'm going to press end stream, and
very good.
Hopefully that will work.
So good coffee, trains, and politics.
Yeah. Probably the most famous train in the world. Listen to that.
Aren't we? Did you say, Philip?
Should we go in?
Right.
Harry wants to see the blue one.